The Viridian jungle takes what it wants, Kira. Not even your Sylphian gifts will protect you there. Elder Thalia's warning echoed in Kira's mind as she secured her pack, the bioluminescent patterns across her blue skin pulsing with determination. Her antennae twitched nervously, sensing the changing air pressure as she approached the jungle's edge. 3 cycles without the midnight orchid and we've lost 12 more, she muttered to herself, checking the slender vials strapped to her belt. Empty, like the hope in her people's eyes. The settlement behind her was dying. The mysterious respiratory illness that had swept through their colony had proven resistant to conventional treatments. Only the enzyme extracted from the midnight orchid, a rare flower that bloomed deep within the Viridian jungle, could provide relief. And with the trading vessels delayed by the ion storms, waiting meant more deaths. Kira paused at the jungle's threshold. The massive trees loomed overhead, their canopy so dense it turned day to twilight. Strange calls and rustles emanated from within, a symphony of danger that every colonist on Veridin knew to avoid, especially alone. I am Sylphian, she reminded herself, her voice steadier than her heart. Plants respond to us, it's in our blood. For generations, her species had communicated telepathically with plant life across the galaxy. This natural affinity had made them valued botanists, healers, and agricultural specialists. Surely it would protect her now. The first steps into the jungle felt like passing through a living curtain. Immediately, the air changed, thicker, richer with oxygen, almost intoxicating. Massive ferns unfurled as she passed, their movements too deliberate to be caused by wind alone. Kira extended her consciousness gently, the way she'd been taught since childhood. I mean no harm, I seek only what I need. The jungle did not answer, but it didn't reject her either. Encouraged, Kira pressed deeper, consulting her scanner. The midnight orchid preferred the acidic soil near the crystal pools, at least 5 kilometers in. If she maintained this pace, she could reach them before nightfall. What Kira didn't notice were the subtle shifts in the vegetation behind her. The way vines slowly reoriented themselves, their fibrous length sliding across bark and stone. The way tendrils tested the air, sensing the unique bioelectric field that her Sylphian body emitted. 3 hours into her journey, Kira paused beside a stream to refill her water purifier. The jungle had grown quieter, no animal sounds, no insect buzzing, just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant drip of condensation. Her antennae stiffened, instinctively detecting the change. Something's watching, she whispered. She scanned the undergrowth, her luminescent patterns brightening with anxiety. Nothing moved, yet the sensation of being observed intensified. The scanner beeped. The crystal pools were close now, just beyond the ridge ahead. Kira quickened her pace, no longer trying to communicate with the surrounding vegetation. Her focus narrowed to the mission: find the orchid, harvest the specimens, return before full dark. As she crested the ridge, her breath caught. Below, in a natural depression, lay a series of shallow pools that glowed with an inner blue light, and surrounding them clusters of black flowers with centers that pulsed with violet bioluminescence. The midnight orchids. Thank the stars, Kira breathed, hurrying down toward them. She never saw the vine that slithered across her path. It coiled around her ankle with lightning speed, yanking her off balance. Kira fell hard, her scanner clattering across stone and into one of the pools. No, she cried, struggling to free herself. But more vines emerged from the surrounding vegetation, whipping around her wrists, her waist, her throat. They constricted with terrifying strength, lifting her from the ground and slamming her against the trunk of a massive tree. Kira tried to extend her consciousness into the plants to make them understand she wasn't a threat. But these vines, they weren't just moving plants, they were predators, and they were hungry. As darkness fell, the jungle began to glow with eerie bioluminescence. And so did Kira, but with each passing hour, her light grew dimmer as the vines slowly drained her life away. The vines pulsed with sickly luminescence as they tightened around Kira's limbs. Each constriction sent waves of weakness through her body, her Sylphian physiology betraying her as the plants methodically drained her life energy. The bioluminescent patterns across her skin flickered erratically, once vibrant blue now fading to a dull gray. Please, she whispered, reaching with her mind toward the vegetation. Where normally she would find the simple consciousness of plant life, hunger for light, thirst for water, here she encountered only an ancient, alien hunger. The vines didn't just want sustenance, they wanted to consume her completely. Night had fully descended on the Viridian jungle. The crystal pools below reflected the 3 moons of the planet, casting prismatic shadows that danced across Kira's increasingly pale features. The midnight orchids bloomed fully now, tantalizingly close yet unreachable. Their scent, sweet and slightly metallic, seemed to mock her failed mission. As consciousness began to slip away, Kira's thoughts turned to her people. Who would bring the cure now? Had her arrogance doomed them all? Her antennae drooped limply as another tendril wrapped around her throat, squeezing with deliberate patience. 5 kilometers away, at the jungle's edge, Dax Mercer frowned at the readings on his portable lab station. The human xenobotanist had been monitoring the unusual bioelectric patterns of the Viridian jungle for 3 months now, cataloging the mysterious fluctuations that occurred primarily at night. But tonight's readings were different, concentrated, intense, and moving in patterns he'd never observed before. "That can't be right," he muttered, adjusting the scanner's sensitivity. The device was registering a non-native bioelectric signature completely encircled by the jungle's predatory power spikes. Something alive was being consumed by the Viridian vines. Dax had seen what remained of other unfortunate explorers who had ventured too deep into the jungle alone. The vines didn't leave much behind, yet the scanner indicated this particular victim was still alive, barely. "Not my problem," he told himself, trying to focus on his research. He'd come to Veridin to study the sentient plant life, not to play hero. After what similar flora had done to his home colony on Proxima III, the memory of finding his family's desiccated remains still haunted him. He'd learned to respect the jungle's boundaries. But the scanner kept blinking, that fatting life signature calling to him like a distress beacon. "Damn it," Dax growled, grabbing his emergency pack. He strapped a plasma cutter to his belt and filled a sprayer with the enzyme solution he'd been developing, a compound that temporarily neutralized the vine's aggressive behavior. Untested, of course, but better than nothing. As he plunged into the jungle, Dax activated his night vision implants. The world transformed into shades of green and blue, the bioluminescent plants creating pathways through the darkness. He moved quickly but cautiously, watching for telltale movement along the ground and overhead. The jungle seemed alive with malevolent awareness. Vines retracted from his path, not out of fear but like predators regrouping. They recognized the threat he posed with his technology and unnatural resilience to their lures. Dax had inoculated himself against their psychic influence months ago. 3 hours of careful navigation brought him to the ridge above the crystal pools. His scanner indicated the life form was nearby, its signature growing fainter by the minute. Dax scanned the area and froze when he saw her, a Sylphian, suspended against a massive tree trunk, nearly covered in throbbing vines. "Impossible," he whispered. Sylphians were supposed to be immune to plant attacks due to their telepathic rapport with vegetation. Yet this one was clearly the vine's prisoner and dinner. Dax approached carefully, noting how the ground beneath his boots seemed to shift subtly, tendrils testing the edges of his reinforced soles. When he reached the base of the tree, he could see the Sylphian's condition was critical. Her bioluminescence flickered like a dying light, her breathing shallow and labored. The vine sensed his presence and tightened protectively around their prey. One massive tendril, thick as his arm, lashed out toward him. Dax dodged and unholstered his plasma cutter. "I hope you're worth saving," he said grimly, knowing the jungle would make him pay for this interference. As the vine surged toward him, Dax raised his cutter and prepared for battle, the fate of the mysterious Sylphian hanging literally in the balance. The plasma cutter hummed to life in Dax's hand, its blue energy field slicing through the first wave of attacking vines. The severed tendrils writhed on the ground, oozing luminescent sap that steamed when it touched the soil. An unearthly howl, more vibration than sound, rippled through the surrounding vegetation. "They're communicating," Dax realized, feeling the jungle shift around him. He'd studied this phenomenon in his research but had never been at the center of it. The vines weren't just reacting, they were coordinating, learning. The Sylphian woman stirred feebly as he approached, her eyes fluttering open, irises so pale blue they were almost white, dilated with fear. "Hold on," Dax called, ducking as another vine whipped over his head. "I'm going to get you out of this." Her lips moved but no sound emerged. Instead, Dax felt a whisper across his consciousness, a telepathic communication tinged with desperation. "They're too strong, go." "Not happening," Dax replied, firing up his enzyme sprayer. The mist settled on the vines closest to him, causing them to recoil temporarily. He used the opening to move closer, methodically cutting through the thinner vines securing her left arm. The jungle's response was immediate and violent. Vines as thick as tree trunks erupted from the ground, isolating them from any escape route. The crystal pools below began to bubble ominously, releasing a pale vapor that Dax's sensors identified as a powerful neurotoxin. "Great," he muttered, working faster. With her left arm free, the Sylphian's luminescence pulsed briefly stronger. Dax cut through the restraints around her waist, then her right arm. As he worked on the vines binding her legs, he could feel the ground trembling beneath them. "Can you move at all?" he asked, catching her as she slumped forward. "Yes, but not far." Her mental voice was clearer now, though tinged with pain. Why would you risk yourself for me? Questions later, Dax said, spraying a wider arc of enzyme mist as dozens of smaller vines began converging on their position. Right now, we need to move. With the last restraint cut, Kira collapsed entirely into his arms, surprisingly light despite her height. Dax quickly administered a stimshot from his emergency kit, hoping it would work on Sylphian physiology. Her skin brightened slightly in response, the patterns across her face pulsing with renewed energy. There's a path that way, he said, pointing to a narrow gap between two writhing walls of vegetation. Can you walk if I support you? I think so, she struggled to her feet, leaning heavily against him. The orchids, I need. The black flowers, that's what brought you here, Dax asked incredulously as they stumbled toward the escape route. She nodded weakly, her antennae trembling. My people are dying, the cure. If we don't move now, you'll die too, Dax interrupted, pulling her along as the path behind them closed with frightening speed. The vines were learning their movements, anticipating their route. They had covered perhaps 20 meters when Dax's scanner alarm blared. The vegetation ahead was rapidly converging to cut them off. Trapped between advancing walls of hungry vines, Dax made a split-second decision. Change of plan, he announced, unclipping a small device from his belt. This will hurt, but it's our only chance. Before Kira could respond, Dax activated the biodisruptor, a prototype he'd developed for extreme situations. The device emitted a focused pulse that temporarily disrupted plant cellular activity in a 10-meter radius. All around them, vines froze mid-motion, their luminescence dimming. The effect was dramatic but came with a cost. Kira screamed in pain, her telepathic connection to plant life making her vulnerable to the disruptor's effects. She collapsed to her knees, her mental cry cutting through Dax's consciousness. What have you done? Bought us 30 seconds, Dax answered grimly, lifting her into his arms. Hold on. He ran through the momentarily paralyzed vegetation, following his scanner's guidance toward the jungle's edge. Behind them, the vines were already recovering, their movement sluggish but gaining speed. With Kira growing limp in his arms, Dax pushed himself to the limit, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the multiple lacerations where vines had scored his skin. The jungle fought to keep them, branches swinging down to block their path, roots rising to trip them. Just when his strength began to fail, the dense canopy thinned. Ahead lay the perimeter fence of his research outpost, its biorepulsion field creating a sanctuary against the jungle's reach. Almost there, Dax gasped, feeling Kira stir against him. Her telepathic voice brushed his mind once more, weaker but determined. Thank you for saying me. As they crossed the barrier, the pursuing vines recoiled from the repulsion field, their hungry tendrils writhing in frustrated rage. Dax collapsed to his knees in the safety of the compound, still cradling the Sylphian's battered form. In the artificial light of the outpost, he could fully see her now tall and slender, with skin that even in its weakened state held an otherworldly beauty. Her eyes, when they opened briefly to meet his, contained galaxies. Rest, he told her, carrying her toward the medical bay. You're safe now. What he didn't tell her was that the jungle never truly let anyone go. It was patient, it would wait, and it never forgot those who escaped its grasp. Morning light filtered through the polarized windows of Dax's research outpost, casting geometric patterns across Kira's resting form. The medical bay's instruments hummed softly, monitoring her vital signs as she slept. The regenerative chamber had accelerated her healing overnight, but the damage inflicted by the vines ran deeper than physical wounds. Dax watched from his workstation, alternating between analyzing the data from last night's encounter and checking on his unexpected guest. He'd extracted samples of the vine's secretions from her skin, a viscous substance that seemed designed specifically to neutralize Sylphian defenses. The jungle had evolved to counter even its supposed allies. Kira stirred, her antennae twitching before her eyes opened. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then recognition dawned, followed by wariness. The human who fights plants, she said aloud, her voice melodic despite its weakness. An unusual hobby. Dax approached slowly, hands visible to show he meant no threat. Most people just call me Dax. How are you feeling? Like I've been squeezed by 1,000 hands, Kira replied, attempting to sit up. Her luminescent patterns flickered with the effort. But alive, thanks to you. She glanced around the outpost, the laboratory equipment, the wall of specimen containers, the charts mapping the jungle's biometric patterns. Her antennae angled forward with interest. You study the jungle, she observed. Not just any researcher would risk themselves for a stranger. Dax shrugged, uncomfortable with the implied heroism. I recognized a Sylphian biosignature, scientific curiosity maybe. Curiosity doesn't face down death vines, Kira countered, her gaze direct and penetrating. Why are you really here on this dangerous frontier? The question struck too close to memories Dax preferred to keep buried. He turned away, adjusting settings on a nearby console. The same reason anyone comes to Veridin, he deflected. Research opportunities unmatched anywhere in the sector. Kira's antennae twitched, a gesture Dax had learned indicated skepticism among Sylphians. She remained silent, however, respecting his boundaries. You mentioned your people were dying, Dax said, changing the subject. The midnight orchids, they contain a compound you need. Kira nodded, her expression growing somber. A respiratory illness has spread through our settlement. The enzyme from the orchid is the only effective treatment we've found. I thought. She hesitated, embarrassment coloring her words. I thought my connection to plant life would protect me. The Viridian vines aren't like plants elsewhere, Dax explained, bringing up holographic images of their cellular structure. They've developed something like a collective consciousness, and they've specifically adapted to neutralize Sylphian telepathy. That's impossible, Kira protested. My people have communed with vegetation across 100 worlds. And on 99 of those worlds you're probably safe, Dax replied. But Veridin is different. These vines don't just want sustenance, they want dominance. The conviction in his voice made Kira study him more closely. You speak like someone with personal experience. Dax's hands stilled on the console. The memories surfaced unbidden, the colony on Proxima III, the reports of unusual plant activity dismissed as exaggeration, returning from an expedition to find the settlement consumed by similar vines. His family, his friends, everything lost in days. Let's just say I respect the jungle enough to keep my distance, he finally answered, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. Kira nodded, then attempted to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and Dax moved with surprising speed to catch her before she fell. Easy, he cautioned, supporting her weight. The vines drained a significant portion of your life energy. Recovery takes time. Their proximity was sudden and unexpected. Dax became acutely aware of her otherworldly features, the subtle luminescence that pulsed just beneath her skin, the delicate structure of her face, the slight electrical charge that seemed to emanate from her body. Sylphians were rare in this sector, and he'd never been this close to one before. Kira seemed equally affected by the contact. Her patterns brightened momentarily, and her antennae curved forward in what Dax recognized as a gesture of interest. Your aura is unusual for a human, she remarked softly. It resonates at a frequency almost compatible with mine. The observation hung between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address. Dax carefully helped her back to the recovery bed, creating distance between them once more. You should rest, he advised, his scientific detachment reasserting itself. The synthesis chamber needs another cycle to complete your treatment. Kira settled back, but her gaze remained on him. My people are still waiting for the cure, Dax. Every day that passes, more fall ill. The unspoken request was clear. Dax glanced toward the jungle visible through the windows, dangerous, unpredictable, yet containing the very substance needed to save lives. There might be another way, he said slowly, an idea forming. The orchids have a symbiotic relationship with the vines. They're not just growing near them by accident. What are you suggesting? Kira asked, her antennae perking up with interest. That we might not need to battle the jungle, Dax explained, bringing up his research notes. We might be able to negotiate with it instead. As the day progressed, they worked together, Dax sharing his scientific knowledge of the jungle's behavior, Kira contributing her species' deeper understanding of plant consciousness. Their different perspectives created both friction and unexpected harmony. And beneath the practical collaboration, something else began to grow. A connection neither had anticipated finding in this remote, dangerous place. Dawn broke over the Viridian jungle, the first rays illuminating the strange apparatus Dax and Kira had constructed at the perimeter of the outpost. 3 days of collaboration had produced something neither could have created alone. A bioresonance amplifier that combined Dax's technology with Kira's innate understanding of plant communication. This feels like madness, Dax admitted, making final adjustments to the device, intentionally calling the vines to us. Kira stood beside him, fully recovered, her luminescent patterns glowing with nervous anticipation. She wore protective gear Dax had modified for her physiology, but nothing could fully shield her if their theory proved wrong. It's not madness, she replied, her antennae quivering slightly. It's recognition that we've been approaching this all wrong. The vines don't just want to feed, they want to be acknowledged. The past days had transformed their initially cautious interaction into something deeper. Working together in the confined space of the outpost, they'd moved from professional collaboration to genuine connection. Kira had shared the complex spiritual ecology of her people, how Sylphians viewed themselves not as masters of plant life but as conversants with it. Dax had gradually revealed his personal tragedy on Proxima III, the loss that had driven him to understand similar predatory flora. They'd touched minds through Kira's telepathy, her consciousness brushing against his with increasing familiarity. And in the quiet moments between research and planning, they'd found themselves drawn together by something neither had expected, a recognition of kindred spirits, both seeking healing in their own ways. "Ready?" Dax asked, his hand hovering over the activation switch. Kira nodded, stepping forward to place her palms on the resonance panels. "Remember, when they come, don't resist. Let me establish contact first." The amplifier hummed to life, sending precisely calibrated frequencies into the jungle, a complex symphony that mimicked the vine's own communication patterns, but with subtle variations that Kira had identified as invitation rather than challenge. For several minutes, nothing happened. The jungle remained still, dawn mist curling around the massive trees at its edge. Then slowly, movement rippled through the undergrowth. Vines emerged, cautious but curious, advancing toward the perimeter where the biorepulsion field had been temporarily modified to allow limited approach. "They're coming," Dax whispered, fighting his instinct to reach for a weapon. Kira closed her eyes, her luminescence intensifying as she extended her consciousness through the amplifier. Dax watched in fascination as her patterns synchronized with the pulsing light of the approaching vines, a visual representation of the telepathic bridge she was building. "We seek harmony," she projected, the thought so powerful that even Dax could sense its echo. "We offer respect and recognition." The vines paused at the boundary, undulating in patterns Dax recognized from his research as communication. They remained poised between aggression and curiosity, centuries of predatory instinct battling with a new possibility. Kira gasped suddenly, her body trembling with the force of the contact. "They're ancient," she managed, "older than we imagined, and they remember everything." The vines surged forward again, this time bringing with them smaller tendrils that carried buds, unmistakably the juvenile form of midnight orchids. "They understood," Dax breathed, barely daring to move. "Not just understood," Kira corrected, her voice filled with wonder. "They're offering a trade. They know what we need, and what they need in return." The realization of what was happening struck Dax with profound clarity. The vines weren't just predators, they were guardians of an ecosystem far more complex than anyone had recognized. The orchids couldn't grow without the vines' protection, and the vines, in their alien way, had been protecting them all along. "They want recognition," Kira explained, still connected to the collective consciousness of the plants. "And boundaries respected. They're willing to provide the orchids if we acknowledge their dominion and offer communion." Dax stepped forward, standing beside Kira as the vines deposited the orchid buds at the boundary. With only slight hesitation, he extended his hand beyond the safety perimeter. "A gesture of trust," he said quietly. A tendril, gentler than any he'd observed before, wrapped around his wrist. Instead of the painful draining he'd expected, Dax felt only a mild tingling as the vine briefly tasted his bioelectric field. Recognition, came Kira's mental translation. "They're marking you as known." When the vine released him, Dax's skin bore a faint luminescent pattern, temporary but meaningful. He and Kira carefully gathered the offered orchid buds, enough to synthesize treatment for her entire settlement. As the vines retreated back into the jungle, Dax and Kira stood in silence, processing the significance of what had occurred. "This changes everything," Dax finally said. "Not just for your people, but for all research on Veridin." "It changes us too," Kira replied softly, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that bridged their physiological differences. The sun had fully risen now, illuminating the borderland between outpost and jungle with golden light. In that liminal space, Dax could see the possibility of something new, not just scientific discovery but personal transformation. "I've spent years studying the jungle from behind barriers," he admitted. "Afraid to truly engage after what happened on Proxima III, but you showed me another way." Kira's luminescence brightened in response to his words, her patterns shifting to a configuration Dax had come to recognize as joy. "And you showed me that sometimes we need more than our traditions to see us through danger," she replied. "Sometimes we need someone who approaches the world differently." As they carried the precious orchid buds back to the laboratory, plans already forming for a new kind of outpost, one that would honor the jungle's sovereignty while creating a true exchange of knowledge, Dax felt something he hadn't experienced since before the tragedy: hope. "Will you stay?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than professional collaboration. Kira's antennae curved forward in that now familiar gesture of affection as she met his gaze. I think we've both found something worth staying for. In the days that followed, as they established the foundation for a new relationship between their peoples and the sentient jungle of Veridin, Kira and Dax discovered that the most valuable symbiosis wasn't between plants and people. It was between hearts that had found understanding across the stars. And in that understanding, both found healing for wounds they'd carried alone for far too long.